Sir, stop right there. This area is for active personnel only. The voice of a young officer cut across the ceremony, like a command sharp, rigid, blocking the path of an elderly man with silver hair, his worn jacket frayed at the seams as he slowly made his way toward the Buds graduation stands. I'm just here to watch my grandson receive his trident, the old man replied, his voice rough but steady with patience. No one steps in here, Grandpa. Rules are rules. The words came out laced with unmistakable contempt. A few young trainees chuckled under their breath. Some parents turned their heads, then shook them quietly. The old man bent down, picked up the folded flag that had slipped from his hand, and stepped back toward the farthest row of seats, the place where no one paid attention and no one cared. A light gust of wind flipped his sleeve just enough to reveal a faded medical tattoo. On the stage, SEAL Commander Nathan Rodriguez, mid-speech, froze, his eyes locked. His breath faltered. He stared at that old tattoo, the symbol of a man he once owed his life to. For several seconds, the world seemed to collapse into silence. A strange, heavy stillness settled over the entire ceremony, as if everyone present was unknowingly waiting for something about to break open. If you believe true courage isn't found in the sound of gunfire, but in the quiet hearts of those who have lived through war, then subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories and help us preserve the memory, dignity, and honor of the quiet heroes who belong to all of us. The old man didn't say a word. The ceremony was still filled with the noise of loudspeakers, shifting chairs, and boots striking the concrete floor, but to him, it all drifted away, fading into a thin layer of distant sound until it disappeared entirely. All that remained was the soft wind moving through the large American flag, waving behind the stands, the kind of wind that touched memory itself, reminding him of places he had stood where he had bled, where he had held life in his hands for someone else. He rested his hand on his knee. The thin, weathered fingers trembled slightly. Not because of age, but because something inside him was stirring, something he had kept buried for years. As his sleeve slipped down a little, the familiar tattoo appeared again, the wings of a Navy Hospital Corpsman, the insignia of the Fleet Marine Force, and the unit number he could never forget. A glint of light fell across his sun-darkened skin. The old silver ring on his hand cast a small reflection, simple, unadorned, yet carrying the weight of an entire life of service. It was the emblem of SEAL Team 7, the unit he had once gone into the harshest firestorms with in the Middle East. A ring very few ever wore, understood only by those who had set foot in places no one else wanted to go. He gently brushed his thumb over the edge of the tattoo. The rough texture beneath his fingertips tightened his chest. For years, he had avoided letting anyone see it. For years, he had chosen silence, chosen to live as just an ordinary old man attending his grandson's graduation, needing no admiration, needing no one to know the battles he had survived. But today, his silence began to touch things he could no longer hold back. He inhaled long and slow, his eyelids lowered, and in that instant, Ramadi 2006 stopped being a memory. It returned as if it had happened only yesterday. An explosion, sand erupting into a blinding cloud, shouts of Corpsman cutting through the smoke tangled with the ripping sound of gunfire in the air. He saw his own blood-covered hands again, saw a young warrior clutching what remained of his shattered arm, saw the pleading eyes of a teammate as he ran straight into the line of fire. He heard the broken static of the radio as the signal cracked apart under the roar of machine guns. He felt the heat of his scorched body armor burning across his back. Everything came rushing back like a gust of wind striking his heart. He opened his eyes. To the outside world, his face hadn't changed. Only his eyes seemed a few years older, a few layers deeper. But inside them, the weight of those who never returned the lives he had saved, and those he couldn't save, the countless nights on the battlefield, all returned. He ran a hand across his chest, lightly, yet heavily at the same time. This wasn't weakness. This was what those who have served carry for a lifetime, something no one can see, but which lives there as vividly as breath. In the distance, names of the graduating SEALs were being called one by one. He looked down at his worn shoes and whispered so softly that only he could hear it. All that matters is he stands on his own 2 feet. That's enough. That was the only reason he came here. Not to be recognized, not to be honored, but simply to see his grandson step into a path he knew far too well, a path of responsibility, of sacrifice, of nights, where silence is more frightening than gunfire. He quietly gripped the folded flag in his hand, the same flag that once lay over the body of his closest friend, the friend he still thought of every time he looked at a clear sky. He murmured a few words, almost unconsciously. "I still remember you." He lifted his head slightly, as if steadying himself to remain present. And when he did, his eyes met the exact moment SEAL Commander Rodriguez was stepping down from the stage. The commander's gaze locked onto the faded tattoo on his wrist. A flash of recognition crossed Rodriguez's face, unmistakable and sharp. Two men separated by an entire parade ground, but their memories, only one breath apart. And in that exact moment, the old man's stillness was about to collide with a wave of humiliation he never expected would follow. The speakers from the graduation ceremony were still echoing when a young officer stepped forward from the row behind him. His eyes slid across the old man's wrist, catching the faint outline of a military tattoo half hidden beneath the sleeve. The corner of his mouth lifted into a smirk, dripping with contempt. "Nice tattoo, old man. You buy it online." His voice was sharp, like metal striking hot concrete. A few of the young trainees burst out laughing. Short, dry, disrespectful laughs cutting through the solemn atmosphere like a cold blade. Some older parents turned to look, but no one intervened. They looked at the old man as if he were a harmless stranger, unimportant, not someone worth defending. The old man didn't answer. Not a word, not even a flicker of anger. Only a quiet breath slipped from his nose, restrained patient, the kind of patience earned by someone who had dealt with reckless youth far too many times. It was as if a camera zoomed in on his shoes, the heels caked with dry mud. Not the mud of Ramadi from years past, but the mud from the long walk he had made just to get here, just to witness the moment his grandson became a SEAL. At the side of his bag, the folded flag peeked out its deep blue edging, marked with time. The same flag that once lay across the chest of his closest friend, the one who never made it home. A faint breeze passed through, lifting a corner of the flag. He reached to hold it down, his movements slow and gentle, yet carrying an invisible weight, the weight of the names he used to whisper in the dark. Then the loudspeaker boomed again, distant and solemn. "We honor all families of service members." He heard the words, and they felt like a dull blade sinking into the deepest part of his heart. Because he was the one who had saved those families, pulled their sons out of the fire, used these trembling hands to keep the children of America alive. But today, no one recognized him. No one knew who he was. No one saw the truth. A quiet humiliation rose inside him, not from the insult, but from the forgetting. And forgetting hurts more than any bullet he ever took. He straightened his back a little. His gaze drifted toward the horizon behind the stage where the American flag was waving proudly. And in that moment, everything blurred again into memory, as if the ceremony were slipping away from the present. The sound of ceremonial drums rolled in from a distance, steady and sure. Each beat was like an old heartbeat, a moment that brought back the young warriors who had fallen beside him. He heard gunfire, metal striking stone, voices yelling "Doc" through the dust of Ramadi. A massive explosion, all of his teammates on the ground before him. And he had to choose in a single heartbeat who still had a chance to live and who did not. Back in the present, he tightened his fist just a little enough for the tendons to stand out along his knuckles. He still said nothing. The young officer squinted, annoyed by the silence. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" "Lost your voice," a mocking grin. A careless shrug from the trainees behind him. The old man looked down at the ground. Not out of weakness, but because he knew better than anyone the loudest people are often the ones who have never stood face to face with death. In the distance, the sunlight shifted, slightly softening, as if time itself slowed for a few seconds, just long enough for older memories to rise with more force. He gently tugged at his sleeve, trying to cover the tattoo, but it was too late. Someone else had already seen it. On the stage, SEAL Commander Rodriguez gripped the edge of the wooden podium. His eyes were fixed on the old veteran's wrist. He recognized that tattoo. He recognized that unit number. And he recognized the man to whom he owed his life. In that moment, the old man's humiliation was about to transform into something no one expected. The wind blew a little stronger. Fine dust swept across the concrete steps where the old man was sitting. He raised his hand to wipe away the tear that had slipped down beside his eye, not because of the insult, but because the memories had surged up too fiercely. It was a small movement, but enough for his sleeve to slide up another inch. And in that exact moment, time seemed to stop. On that thin, weathered wrist, the tattoo appeared sharply under the sunlight. The Corpsman wings, the SEAL emblem, and the half-faded code FMF-07. A tattoo that only those who had served beside Marines in brutal combat operations could bear. A tattoo that only someone who had stood in the line of fire to save another warrior's life had the right to carry. In that moment, the light seemed drawn to his wrist, focusing on that one point. Every sound on the parade grounds, the loudspeakers, the footsteps, the mocking laughter, even the wind vanished, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. On the stage, SEAL Commander Nathan Rodriguez abruptly lost his voice mid-sentence. The speech froze. His hand tightened around the edge of the podium. His eyes widened as if he had just seen a ghost walk out of the past. He couldn't look away from that wrist. His gaze grew heavier not because of shock, but because of recognition. Recognition of something he never thought he would see again. Recognition of a man he once believed was no longer alive. Recognition of the very person who kept him alive during the Ramadi ambush of 2006. An aide standing beside Rodriguez whispered for him to return to his speech, but Rodriguez didn't move. He stepped back slightly, then walked toward the edge of the stage, eyes locked on that tattoo. A shaky breath escaped him, and he spoke. "Excuse me. I need to acknowledge someone." His voice carried through the microphone, thick with emotion. No one understood what was happening. But as Rodriguez left the stage, descending the steps toward the parade ground, a wave of tension rippled outward. SEAL trainees standing in formation froze, all turning their heads in the same direction. Parents in the rows ahead fell silent, as if waiting for something important to unfold. Rodriguez walked straight ahead, each step heavy like nails driven into wood. No one dared step into his path. And he walked toward only one person, the silver-haired old man sitting at the very end of the row, the same man who had been brushed off as a troublesome old guy just minutes earlier. Every whisper died. Only the weighted footsteps of the SEAL commander remained. The old man lifted his head, his eyes still slightly wet. He saw Rodriguez's figure approaching. In that moment, he understood that everything was about to change, though he had no idea how. Rodriguez stopped right in front of him, close enough for the old man to see the small scars along the commander's temples, remnants of battles he himself had once run into without hesitation. The old man tightened his grip on the folded flag like a reflex to shield himself. Rodriguez stared directly at the tattoo, his breathing slowing. His pupils trembled slightly, as if the memories inside him still echoed with the sound of explosions that had never fully faded the burning night in Ramadi. The ambush on the highway, the cries for help piercing through gunfire, and this very hand, this exact hand pulling him back from the edge of death. He swallowed once, the sound thick with emotion, and spoke, his voice breaking enough for those nearby to hear the tremble. "Is that you?" The old man didn't answer, but his eyes confirmed everything. People no longer saw just an ordinary elderly man. They saw a living symbol sitting before them, someone the military has only one word for: Doc. The entire ceremony fell silent, not because of orders, but because respect rose instinctively from the deepest part of everyone who understood the meaning of sacrifice. And as the SEAL commander opened his mouth to speak the next words, the event before them was no longer a graduation. It was about to become a defining moment in the history of a warrior community. No one breathed. No one moved. Only the sound of Commander Rodriguez's footsteps echoed as he stopped right in front of the old man, and the entire ceremony seemed to stretch tight with anticipation. Rodriguez turned facing the stands and the rows of new SEALs. He drew a long breath. His hand tightened around the microphone until his knuckles whitened. Then he spoke, not with the stern command voice he used in training, but with the voice of a man acknowledging a debt of life and death. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Hospital Corpsman First Class Daniel Harrison, United States Navy, retired." The entire parade ground erupted for a split second. Seats scraped, breaths caught. Mothers pressed their hands to their chests in shock. But then, unexpectedly, all the noise collapsed into absolute silence as every person slowly rose to their feet. Not out of formality, but out of respect. The old man, Daniel Harrison, sat there, with his hands resting on his knees, his gaze calm and still like the surface of a night lake. He wasn't used to people standing for him. He wasn't used to recognition at all after so many years living like a quiet shadow in society. Rodriguez looked at him, his throat tightening around every word. "Doc Harrison saved 8 of us under fire. Ramadi 2006, including me." The entire ceremony froze as if even the air forgot how to move. Some young SEALs raised their hands to their mouths, unable to believe what they were hearing. A few parents wiped tears because they understood exactly what that meant for anyone who had ever sent a child into war. And in the graduation formation, one young man nearly lost his balance from the shocked Tyler Harrison. A brand new SEAL standing in the second row, still holding the trident he had just earned minutes earlier. When he heard the name Daniel Harrison, he thought it was just a coincidence. But then Doc Harrison. Ramadi 2006. He felt the blood drain from his face. His eyes widened, his chest tightened. It was his grandfather. The man he thought was simply a gentle old soul who liked pruning plants in the yard, who sat quietly listening to the radio, who told simple stories but never about himself. The man who had no medals hanging on the walls. The man who never shared the details of his military past. And now before him and more than 500 people, a SEAL commander had spoken his name, the name revered across the entire Special Operations community, Doc Harrison. Tyler let out a shaky breath. His hand gripped the edge of his uniform pants. Not out of embarrassment, but out of a rush of pride, awe, and overwhelming emotion. He looked at his grandfather, the silver-haired man, bowing his head as feelings surged through him. In that moment, Tyler felt small, yet somehow standing on the shoulders of a legacy too great for words. Rodriguez turned back toward Harrison, his voice filled with reverence that rang across the ceremony like a bell. "Sir, it's an honor to have you here with us today." Harrison shook his head softly, speaking so quietly that only those nearest could hear. "I only came to watch my grandson graduate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one imagined that a man who wore the Navy Cross, a man who saved 8 SEALs under a storm of bullets, would be sitting in the very back row, simply to quietly watch his grandson take the next step in life. Rodriguez continued deeper, slower, like a vow, "You brought them home. And today we stand here because of you." The stands trembled not with applause, but with absolute reverent silence. A silence heavier than any cheers ever heard at a SEAL ceremony. Harrison bowed his head in thanks, his eyes shining with a humility so pure it was almost painful to witness. He wasn't proud of his heroics. He was proud of only one thing, that his grandson had chosen this path on his own courage. The wind rose again. The American flag behind them snapped once as if affirming the meaning of the moment. And in that sacred silence, Rodriguez understood it was time for everyone present to hear the truth about the legend sitting before them. No one at the ceremony that day knew the next moment would change everything. Commander Rodriguez stood before the microphone, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out the phone he had kept in his uniform pocket for years. Not because the ceremony required it, but because he wanted everyone to know the truth about the silver-haired man sitting in the last row, a truth he had carried in his heart since 2006. His voice rose slowly, solemnly, each word weighted like an old oath. "I want to read for all of you the Navy Cross citation for Hospital Corpsman First Class Daniel Harrison." And as he spoke, the entire parade ground fell so silent that one could hear the breeze sliding through the rows of seats. He read about September 15th, 2006 in Ramadi, when the convoy was ambushed under a storm of gunfire, when the earth shook from an explosion that shattered the entire unit in seconds. He told them how Harrison, despite having shrapnel lodged in his own shoulder, charged into the open kill zone, a place no one else dared step into, dragging young soldiers out of the rubble, treating wounds so severe even the wounded themselves didn't believe they had a chance to live. Rodriguez's voice tightened when he spoke of the 4 hours Harrison crawled through burning sand, changing dressings, stopping arterial bleeds, coordinating medevacs, while rounds cracked past him from every direction. He spoke of hands trembling from blood loss, yet steady enough to hold on to each man, refusing to let a single one slip away. He read that Harrison's actions directly saved all 8 warriors under his care that day. When the final words left his lips, no one at the ceremony dared breathe too loudly. The newly graduated SEALs felt a strange weight settle on their shoulders, the weight of history of courage so immense they weren't sure how they could ever measure up to it. Harrison lowered his head. He wasn't used to praise. He had never wanted to hear those stories again. But when Rodriguez stepped toward him and asked, voice thick with emotion, why he had done it, the old man answered with a quiet sentence, soft as a breeze, yet heavy enough to make every person standing near him shiver. "I just did what a man should do. Bring them home." Rodriguez replied immediately, simple but solid as stone, "And you did, every one of them." As that sentence hung in the air, an unexpected command cut through the silence. The American flag began to lower in the ritual reserved for heroes. The band started playing the melody every service member knows. Young officers, parents, new SEALs, one by one, they stood at attention. No one told them to. They stood because their hearts demanded it. Harrison lifted his gaze and his eyes glimmered with the light of someone who had once stared death in the face and understood the true value of life. Tyler, watching from the formation, still shaken, felt his shock transform into a pride larger than himself. He understood now that he was standing before a living part of SEAL history, a legacy he wasn't sure he could ever live up to. When the final note of the trumpet faded, the parade ground remained absolutely silent. No more laughter from the disrespectful. No more noise of a typical graduation ceremony. Only pure reverence, the kind reserved for a man who carried the heaviest burden a corpsman can bear to hold life for others, even when his own life is slipping away. And just as the silence began to soften, another lesson deeper, more human, was about to emerge from the old man's next words. When the last note of the trumpet faded, Tyler stepped out of formation. He no longer carried the rigid posture of a newly pinned seal. He walked like someone who had just rediscovered a part of his own soul. His eyes were red, his breath uneven, and his hand still clenched tightly around his graduation cap. He stopped in front of his grandfather, the man he thought he had understood his entire life. His voice cracked. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell me?" Harrison looked at his grandson, his gaze carrying the gentle warmth that only those who have walked through war tend to keep inside, like the last layer of armor protecting their hearts. He placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder, light but steady, and answered with a sentence that made every seal in the rows nearby hold their breath. "Because I wanted you to earn your trident for yourself, not live in the shadow of my name." The words fell like cold steel, heavier than any speech delivered that day. The young trainees went silent. Many had heard stories about the pressure of inheriting a family legacy, but none of them had witnessed a veteran refuse glory solely to protect the freedom of choice for the next generation. Tyler bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. He understood now that his grandfather's love was not found in boasting about past battles, but in trusting Tyler to choose his own path on his own strength. At that moment, Rodriguez stepped forward. He placed a hand over his chest and bowed deeply to Harrison. Rank no longer mattered. There was no line between commander and veteran. There was only one man paying respect to the person who had taught him what courage truly meant, something no classroom had ever been able to teach. Rodriguez's voice was soft, but unmistakably clear. "Sir, you've shown us what real courage looks like." Harrison simply smiled. A small smile, a little tired, yet enough to soften the hearts of everyone standing near him. Then he spoke a sentence that felt like the closing line of an entire life of service. "Courage isn't noise. It's the silence that follows duty done right." And in that instant, the crowd bowed their heads. Not because of protocol, not because of pressure, but because they knew they had just heard a rare truth, one that could only be spoken by someone who had lived far beyond anything taught in textbooks. Many of the new SEALs glanced inward, wondering if they would ever possess the kind of quiet strength he carried. A few of the young officers who had mocked him earlier stood frozen faces, pale. But the most astonishing thing came from Harrison himself. He did not look at them with anger. No rebuke, no resentment. Just a calm gaze. A forgiveness as light as breath. A forgiveness so heavy it made the young men feel the weight of their own immaturity. The ceremony grew even quieter than moments of mourning. Everyone straightened their posture, adjusted their collars, and drew a deep breath, reminded that they were standing before a man whose silence held the value of a lecture on honor. Tyler lifted his head and looked into his grandfather's eyes. Two generations met, one old, weathered by fire and war, the other young, ready to step into the path the older one had carved with blood. The bond between them needed no words. It was the natural inheritance of duty, of honor, of lessons no one teaches, but everyone must learn. Harrison gently tapped his grandson's shoulder, passing on what felt like an entire unwritten chapter he had carried for a lifetime. And as Tyler stepped back into formation, the old man knew that what was about to happen next would leave the final, unforgettable mark on this ceremony. A few months after that graduation ceremony, the Coronado base rested quietly under the morning sun. People began to realize something. The story of Daniel "Doc" Harrison didn't fade the way other ceremonies did. It didn't blur with time. It spread, seeping into every corner of the base, every training hallway, every conversation between the new waves of incoming trainees. One morning at the entrance to the Special Operations Training Compound, a new bronze plaque was installed. No decoration, no embellishment. Only a single line carved sharply, standing out like a vow. In honor of Corpsman Daniel "Doc" Harrison, the quiet guardian. Everyone who passed by paused for a few seconds. No explanation needed. Just seeing that name was enough. They knew they were standing before a piece of the legacy the SEAL community holds in its heart. From that day on, every combat medical training class had a new lesson. Not in the official curriculum, not on slides, but passed down like ritual. Instructors spoke of a corpsman who crawled 4 hours through enemy fire to save 8 teammates. A man who never called himself a hero. A man with no high rank, no shiny insignia, yet whose honor towered above every title. The new SEAL trainees listened, faces tightening with respect as they heard his name. Doc Harrison. They learned how he treated wounds, how he stayed calm under fire, how he put the lives of others above his own. But more importantly, they learned about silence, the silence of those who do the right thing without needing applause. Time passed softly like the Coronado sea breeze. Harrison continued living a simple life, appearing at the base from time to time, wearing the same old jacket and the weathered silver ring. Yet every time he walked in, even without a uniform, the young SEALs instinctively stood straighter. Not because of regulations, but because of respect, and because he reminded them that real heroes do not always stand in the spotlight. Then one morning, with no crowds, no announcements, only early sunlight and the faint rumble of a helicopter warming up at the far end of the runway, Tyler Harrison, his grandson, adjusted the straps on his pack and stood before the aircraft waiting to take him on his first deployment. He wasn't trembling, but there was a light in his eyes, the kind only seen in those who feel the full weight of military duty. Harrison walked up and placed his aged hand on Tyler's wrist. On Tyler's skin, a fresh tattoo was still slightly red, a replica of the tattoo Harrison had carried his entire life. Not to show off, but to remember. Tyler bowed his head, lifted his grandfather's hand, and kissed the tattoo. No words were spoken, but everyone nearby understood this moment was not just a private gesture between two generations. It was a vow to continue a legacy. Harrison smiled gently and gripped his grandson's shoulder. Then he spoke one sentence, the same sentence that had guided him through a lifetime of service, the one that had become his moral anchor. "Bring them home, son." Tyler nodded. He understood. It wasn't merely advice. It was an unwritten order passed down from a survivor to the one about to face the test. And as he stepped onto the aircraft, he carried in his heart the legacy of an entire generation that had kept that promise through nights lit by fire and fear. As the engines roared, Harrison watched him go, his hand resting over his heart, his breath slow but peaceful. He knew the boy would return stronger. But even if life tested him, he believed Tyler would understand the true meaning of courage, not strength, but responsibility for the person beside you. Coronado Base shrank in Tyler's field of vision. The sky opened wide before him, and the legacy of his grandfather, the quiet soldier, flew with him into a new chapter. Brave veteran stories. We remember the quiet heroes. If this story makes you believe that honor and kindness never retire, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Brave Veteran Stories so that none of their memories are ever forgotten.